and welcome to Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Assembly Member Rebecca Seawright. I'm the first woman to represent Assembly District 76 on the Upper East Side in Roosevelt Island. I started my community involvement as a Community Board 8 member. Today, we will be discussing the importance of grassroots organizing. True community organizing thrives on the spirit of the neighborhood and its residents and keeps a watchful eye on issues that affect all of us while promoting a better quality of life. My guests tonight are Joyce Short, Chair of the Roosevelt Island Residents Association Governmental Relations Committee, and Elizabeth Patrick, Vice President of the East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association. Thank you both for being here. And we'll start with you, Elizabeth, if you'll tell us a little bit about your organization.
Sure. The East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association was founded earlier this year as a formal organization. We had been working together probably for the last 6 or more years related to the subway that's being built in our neighborhood, 2nd Avenue subway station. And our focus is largely quality of life issues, so transportation, sanitation, pedestrian safety, those sorts of things.
Great. And Joyce?
Well, the Roosevelt Island Residents Association was created in order basically to protect the quality of life and to be a spokesperson for the community. I also am on the board for the Roosevelt Island Community Coalition, and our function is to address the needs of the community in relation to the development of the Cornell Tech campus that's coming to Roosevelt Island.
Great. And what do you consider the first steps that you take when you're starting to organize a community-based organization?
Well, I think for us, it was easier because we were able to coalesce around one issue that seemed of importance to our residents, and that was the building of the 2nd Avenue subway and the station that's at 72nd Street. We did, though, have the good fortune to have a number of other neighborhood associations that were long established before ours, and we were given a lot of referrals to reach out to them for advice and guidance. And I would say the 2 pieces of advice that we received that have been very valuable. The first was to try to get a critical mass of people in the leadership group so that there was a division of labor and no one person was shouldering the load and would burn out. Someone said, trust me, when you're trying to get things done, it's a marathon and not a sprint. The second piece of advice we received is do what you can to find an effective way of communicating with all of the residents, because when you want to get someone to a meeting, it's very tedious if you have to try to put up flyers on lampposts and that sort of thing. So we have found having our steering committee and an email list that continues to build to be our most effective way of keeping our residents informed.
And Joyce?
Well, I would have to parrot exactly what Liz had said. It is so important to build a coalition and to have a particular need that you can focus on. The Roosevelt Island Community Coalition had a specific need where the Roosevelt Island Residents Association was more broadly based. And it was important to reach out to everyone in the community. But technology today serves as a very good source of creating consensus and being able to communicate with your membership so that you know what it is that you are representing and who supports the things that you're fighting for.
Mm-hmm. And how do you suggest that elected officials be of help to neighborhood organizations?
Well, I think where we need the most help is your knowledge of how the city and state agencies work. We hope that if we have something we feel we need to accomplish, we can come to you for guidance, because none of us feel we have any insights as to how to get things done. We hope in return that we can organize our residents and make it easy for you to help us so that you're not trying to beat on every door yourself. So I think for us it's that partnership where if you make it easy for us to understand how best we can get things done, we'll get our volunteers mobilized and in action.
Great. And Joyce, how do you see your elected officials being of help to your groups?
Our elected officials on Roosevelt Island are absolutely critical to the quality of life on Roosevelt Island. We have a very peculiar governmental structure on Roosevelt Island. We're actually governed by a corporation. So if there was ever an example of why you can't govern by corporation, Roosevelt Island would be it. You know, there has to be a difference between how you run a business and how you run government. The profit motive is certainly, you know, the primary focus of a business, whereas providing services for the community is the goal of government. So there is a conflict there, and unfortunately, on Roosevelt Island, we have that conflict, you know, there is nothing in the Constitution of the United States that says that it's okay to govern by corporation. It specifically states that you are to govern the residents of the United States by republic, and so when there's a difference between how the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation determines to govern and the needs of the community, then our government officials are our lifeline.
Excellent, that's great. And I was very happy to pass two pieces of legislation, the Public Purpose Funds Bill and another bill for Roosevelt Island. I commend you and your activism because these bills came from constituents walking in my door. So what do you see the future for your organizations, how you can be more affected by government and policy and the success of your organization?
Well, I think some of the problems that we'd like to tackle are cross boundaries. And so a recent one that we're working on that we hope we'll bring to close soon is trying to get better bus service in our neighborhood. And since the MTA has the city component, the state component, and certainly when the subway was involved, even a federal component. So what we have found the most helpful, we started local. We reached out to Ben Kalos, who then coordinated with your office and Liz Kruger's office to help us figure out how do we get the MTA to focus on this problem for us. So we feel if we can find residents that are banded around one issue, whether it's in our neighborhood or some of the other adjacent associations, and combine that with the partnership all of you elected officials seem to have among yourselves, then we're pretty confident we'll get the job done.
Terrific. And Joyce?
I agree that partnering with other organizations that have similar or overlapping needs certainly builds your base and makes you more effective. I believe that also it's important to create either a newsletter or a newspaper, some way to distribute your information and use technology, and that it's also extremely important to listen as well as to speak to your base in order to hear what their needs are and be able to best represent them.
Terrific, great. And what about the future? What do you consider your biggest issues for the future for your organization and the residents?
Well, I think the next issue that's our top priority has to do with pedestrian safety. We, certainly have some dangerous intersections, and your office has been very helpful to us trying to get, left turn signals and this sort of thing to put some order around those dangerous intersections. But increasingly, we're finding a lot of problems with commercial bicyclists delivering for restaurants and other businesses. So one of the things we'd like to tackle is to go to each business, introduce ourselves as a neighborhood association, and just frankly ask the business owner to partner with us to just follow the rules that are already in place for the delivery cyclists. We feel that if we can partner together with them, we'll have a great success. Unfortunately, there may be occasions where we need to try to inform our residents that perhaps we shouldn't patronize that organization because they're not being good neighbors. One thing that we would love to see is somehow could the letter grade that's assigned to every restaurant somehow incorporate what we think of as a safety element that's outside of the restaurant. That's the delivery component. So if someone has cyclists and our residents are calling 311 to report wrong way riding on the sidewalk, just going through the traffic lights altogether, e-bikes, we want to hope that that can somehow be factored into their grade. So that would change, we would need a lot of help trying to reach the city agency that would consider amending the scorecard to incorporate that component. Any ideas?
Right.
We'd love to have them.
Great. And Joyce?
Well, for us, the biggest impact on our future is the development of Cornell Tech and how that actually impacts the day-to-day lives of Roosevelt Islanders. We are a town with only one street, and it has one lane going north and going south. And so truck traffic from construction becomes a problem and an issue. If you have a backup of truck traffic, then how do you get an ambulance down the street if one of our residents is having a stroke? So, that's certainly something that interrupts our quality of life. The additional 7,000 that are slated to, the population increase of 7,000 that's predicted will be, and 50% of its current population, we now have 14,000 people, so that raises the population to 21,000. So our needs for additional policing, our needs for additional grounds crew, for the impacts on our school system, all of these things have to be taken into consideration to a greater extent than what was done through the ULURP process. We were particularly disappointed with the oversight of the impacts of Cornell on the community. And as it develops, we're hoping that our elected officials, as you know, we're going to call on you to help us get through and protect the lifestyle of Roosevelt Islanders.
Absolutely. And one of the things, I recently published an article in Education Update about called Senior Citizen Higher Education Alert, about the colleges that are offering courses for free to seniors. And one thing I would like to propose for Cornell Technion is to offer free classes for the residents of Roosevelt Island, in particular the senior citizen community, where they can come onto the campus and audit classes and have jobs and really be a good neighbor to the island residents.
That would be wonderful. We in fact had something about a give back to the community in education on our list of things that we requested, so that's very consistent with what we'd like to see on Roosevelt Island.
Terrific. So Elizabeth and Joyce, let me ask you, what are some of the accomplishments of your neighborhood associations?
Well, ours is a fairly new one, but we certainly started informally several years ago related to the 2nd Avenue subway, as I mentioned. Since that time, we feel we've actually pulled ourselves together as a neighborhood. We feel like we're no longer just anonymous people living in a high-rise, that this East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association has really made us get to know one another. We're 13 buildings at the moment and trying to gather more momentum. But since we have been together, we worked on some small initiatives like the placement of the city bike stations in the neighborhood. We had an opportunity to give some feedback and move them from in front of some of our residential buildings to side streets or corners where small businesses didn't seem to mind having the city bike. And we've also successfully worked to push back that mid-block entrance for the 2nd Avenue subway, but that was sort of the issue that brought us all together.
Great. And Joyce?
Well, through the years, we've done a number of things through RERA. I think the community feels that probably the most important one was that we protected the tramway. At one point, there was a real issue. We had an accident on the tram. It was the one and only accident that ever occurred on the tram in its 40 years, but it could have led to closing down the tram, and the community, we were able to coalesce the community and create a tremendous amount of support to keep the tramway open, and today I think the tramway is one of the icons of New York City. We also have been able to keep our parkland from being encroached on through development. We've had instances where our parkland has been threatened, and we were able to mount an effort in order to keep that from happening. Another thing that we've been able to do was to make sure that there are seats on the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation board in order for residents of the community to be represented on the board. And as you mentioned, the public purpose funds, you've saved our public purpose fund and made that a permanent part of the Roosevelt Island landscape. And those the public purpose funds really enable our community organizations to function and to have the budgeting necessary in order to provide the services that make our community a neighborhood.
Terrific, great. And how many members would you say? I know you said there's 13 buildings in the East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association. How many residents members would you say that you have in each of your organizations?
Well, at the moment, we've got the 13 buildings representing about 3,000 residents. We know that our general area from the East River to 3rd Avenue, 79th to 69th has probably 44,000 residents. Wow. So that's just a tiny group of them. But we have, through our petition for improved bus service in our neighborhood, been able to get many more people on our database whose buildings aren't yet part of our association, but that's the next group of outreach we plan to attack. So we feel that we've gotten great support from the 13 representatives of those buildings who in turn post things within their co-op or their rental building, as well as this database that is up to 2,700 people, not all of whom overlap with the original 13. So we've got to make a much harder push to get closer to 44,000, but bit by bit.
A lot of people. Yes. And Joyce, your organizations?
We have 14,000 folks who live on Roosevelt Island today. And the Roosevelt Island Residents Association is an elected board, and it's elected by the various buildings. So each building has a certain amount of representatives, and the amount is based, of course, on the population of the building. Now, the Roosevelt Island Community Coalition addresses the needs of the same 14,000 people, but it's divided differently. How our organization is structured, the various nonprofit organizations that provide services to the community send a representative to the Roosevelt Island Community Coalition, and those representatives then elect the board, and we receive our information from the various organizations that tell us what their individual needs are. And that's, the needs that we address.
Terrific, great. And what are the margins of your East 72nd Neighborhood Association? I know you said you go from the East River to 3rd, but how far south and north do you go?
Well, we are somewhere in between 69th and 79th because they're already very well established, very well performing East 79th Street Neighborhood Association and the East 60s. And they're really our icons because they've been in business 25 years and more, and we are in our first year. So they're usually people we check with in terms of issues where we might have common problems we're trying to solve. But in general, we are just shy of 79th and probably starting just above 69th and 3rd to the East River.
Terrific. And do either of your organizations qualify to receive grant money? Are you 501c3 status, or is that something you're working to establish? Or where do you get your funding for your outreach?
Well, we set ourselves up as a 501c4. And we did receive, and we've been teasing Ben about this, a modest starter sum this year, since only our first year of operation. But for each of our member buildings, we asked that the member building pay $500 to the association, so that's giving us a kitty to not only pay the ministerial bills like tax filings and this sort of thing, audits, but when we do, for example, we'd love to have planters on the corners of some of our buildings, and we'll have to provide those funds ourselves. But we found that many neighborhood associations have different membership themes, and we chose not to have individuals pay anything, just try to get a contribution at the building level. And you know, some of our smaller buildings have been teasing us, should we really be paying $500 when we're only 20 apartments and someone else is 450? We said, we'll re-examine when we have more members, but for now we need that $500.
And Joyce, your organizations?
The Roosevelt Island Residents Association is a 501c4. And the organization runs various events for the community. I know you've come out to enjoy some of them. We have an Easter egg hunt. We have a cherry blossom festival. So we have a few events that enable us to raise funds. The Roosevelt Island Community Coalition is actually not a 501c3. It's not a nonprofit. However, the member organizations are nonprofits. But there is nothing that we create funding for in order to work with Cornell and try to represent the needs of the community in working with Cornell. So we haven't seen a need yet for developing any kind of financing for the organization.
And you also have the great Halloween parade and
yes, we do.
contest, which
Yes.
is always a lot of fun. And I'll put in a plug for the Carl Schurz Park Conservancy up near your area. Their fall festival is this weekend, and their doggy pet Halloween Howl is the 16th, I believe, of October.
I have to come over.
So we have community events in both areas, and so fortunate to have organizations like you're a part of and your leadership to really accomplish things for the residents, for the quality of life, and to keep it safe. So again, I want to thank you both for all your hard work. So as an elected official, my office and our team of staff really try to work hard with the various neighborhood associations and the community board. How do you feel that we can be more effective in helping you address the various issues that you've identified with your organizations?
Well, I know for us in the East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association, issues around the MTA, you know, earlier on it was the subways construction, and thankfully that's wrapping up. And now we're trying to get some help on the bus service in our neighborhood. And, you know, it would be very interesting to our residents to better understand how you have worked so effectively with Ben Kalos and with Liz Kruger to try to target, you know, the MTA in an instance like that. Or, for example, how you took it upon yourselves to ask for a new left turn traffic light at an intersection at 72nd and 1st. It isn't something that came top to mind as your jurisdiction, so to speak, as a state representative.
Well, I sit on the Corporations and Authorities Committee as one of the committees in Albany in the state legislature, and I requested that appointment knowing that the MTA and the 2nd Avenue subway and the bus system is just so vital and important to the residents of my district, and I was lucky when the speaker put me on that committee. So the MTA comes before this committee for their budget request, and recently I went down to the MTA with Senator Liz Kruger and with Betty Cooper Wallerstein, Councilman Kalos and their staff. And Betty Cooper Wallerstein, who founded the East 79th Street Neighborhood Association, really requested that the elected officials go and sit down at the table with the MTA officials and address one by one all the issues of the district. And so even though I'm a state official, we work very, very closely with our liaisons, with the various city agencies, and with our councilmen and with our state senators. So all the electeds on the Upper East Side are on the same page when it comes to really pushing for the issues that the residents want, like more buses and left lanes, and basically to improve their quality of life and safety issues. And again, I commend you both so much on what you've been able to accomplish. And so, you know, this office exists for the people, and we're happy to be of assistance and work at all levels, just not the city and state, but also at the federal government level with our Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney and our 2 U.S. senators. So any way that we can be helpful at any branch of government, we're happy to assist and try to be effective.
Well, it's helpful to us to know we have one place we can touch base on and get everything.
And we're right around the corner from 72nd Street, so we see firsthand the quality of life issues. So,
and that's going to be a major issue for us as we get more population from Cornell.
Right.
Our F train on Roosevelt Island is at capacity, and it's difficult sometimes for people to get to work in the morning. Oftentimes they'll have to wait for an additional train to come by because it's so packed when it arrives that they can't get on.
Right.
So this is a situation that's going to get far worse, and so your relationships with the MTA is certainly going to be something that can benefit Roosevelt Island tremendously going forward. So we're happy that you've been able to establish that relationship.
Great, and I want to encourage everyone to take the F train or the tram over to Roosevelt Island or drive across the bridge. It's a beautiful island, and it's really a special place, as is Yorkville and the Upper East Side. Well, thank you both, and please keep up your great work. Our community office, I call it your community office, is at 1365 First Avenue. And want to welcome you to stop by anytime, and look forward to working with you more in the future.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have. I'm Rebecca Seawright, and on behalf of my guests Joyce Short and Elizabeth Patrick, thank you for watching Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Good night.